The wind screamed through the dry grass of Redemption Bluff like a warning. The year was 1887. The small town sat alone on the edge of the plains, cracked and tired, held together only by dust and fear. People didn't smile here. They watched, judged, and whispered. Everyone followed rules, not kindness. It was a place where being poor meant being silent, where being different meant being hated, and for a little orphan girl named Clara Ara, it meant being invisible. Clara Ara was only 10, but her eyes were already old. She had lost her parents 2 years earlier to fever. One day they were warm beside her, and the next, she was standing alone beside 2 wooden boxes in the cold ground. There were no tears left in her after that, just silence. She became property of the town, not adopted with love, but given away like an extra plate. Reverend Hale and his wife Martha took her in. They called it mercy. But to Clara Ara, it felt more like a slow punishment. She lived in their attic. It was dark with thin wooden walls and a small broken window. She slept on a hard cot and was fed scraps. Her life was cooking, cleaning, and more cleaning. Martha's voice was always sharp, full of orders and insults. The Reverend preached about love from the church every Sunday, but he showed none at home. He spoke to Clara Ara only when she did something wrong, but Clara Ara had one thing. Just one. That mattered. A doll. It was small, made of old cloth and yarn. Her mother had sewn it for her with thread stitched by hands that once wiped her tears. The doll had a crooked smile and faded colors. It wasn't much, but it was hers. At night, when the attic was cold and silent, Clara Ara would whisper to it, holding it tight. It smelled like her mother, wood smoke and lavender. That little doll was her whole world. Everything changed the day the Lakota came. They weren't an army, just a tired group of families, mothers, fathers, children, on horseback, stopping at the creek just outside town. They were dusty, hungry, and quiet. They said nothing to the townspeople. They only drank water and refilled their bags. But from the moment they arrived, the town grew tense. Doors shut, curtains moved, the preacher's voice turned dark. "They're heathens," he whispered. Wild and godless, Clara Ara was sent to the creek for water. She walked with her bucket, her bare feet kicking up dust. She was halfway to the water when she heard it, crying. Sharp and loud. Not angry crying, not hungry crying. It was deep, painful sobbing, the kind that breaks something inside you just by hearing it. She hid behind a willow tree and looked out. A little native girl, maybe 5 or 6, was on the ground crying hard. Her small body shook with each sob. Her father, a tall man with long black hair tied with leather, knelt beside her, his large hand rubbing her back. He looked strong but helpless. No words he said could calm the child. Clara Ara froze. She had heard that same kind of crying before, from her own mouth after her mother died. The kind that makes your chest hurt and your body feel too small to hold it all. Clara Ara didn't understand the girl's language, but she understood the pain, and in that moment the bucket of water, the fear of punishment, even the warnings of Reverend Hale, they all faded. She reached into her pocket. Her fingers touched soft cloth, her doll, her only comfort, the only thing left from her parents. The only thing that made her feel not completely forgotten. Clara Ara took it out. She didn't think. She just walked. The warriors by the creek stood up straight. Their hands went to their belts near their knives. The townsfolk behind windows gasped. Even the sheriff looked ready to shoot. But Clara Ara didn't stop. She walked right up to the crying girl. Slowly, shaking slightly, she knelt in front of her. Then she held out the doll. The little native girl looked up, tears running down her dusty cheeks. She reached out, touched the doll, then grabbed it and hugged it tightly. Her crying stopped. The tall man stared at Clara Ara. His eyes didn't blink. His face didn't change, but something heavy passed between them, something deep. He gave her a slow nod. Not thanks. Something more. Then the group packed up. Quietly they rode away, Clara Ara stood alone by the creek, her pocket empty, her chest aching. She had given away the last piece of her family, her only friend. But somehow she didn't regret it. She didn't know that the next morning, Redemption Bluff would wake to the sound of thunder, not from the sky, but from 500 warriors on horseback. And they had come for the girl who gave away everything. The next morning didn't begin with birds or sunlight. It began with a deep, low sound, like thunder rolling from the earth itself. Clara sat up in her small attic bed. At first, she thought it was a dream, but the window beside her rattled. The floorboards shook, then a scream from somewhere below. She crawled to the window and looked out. What she saw made her heart stop. The fields beyond Redemption Bluff were no longer empty. Hundreds of riders moved like a wave across the land. Horses kicked up dust that covered the morning sky. Their riders wore face paint, beads, and feathers. Spears shone in the sun. Bows were slung across their backs. They didn't shout. They didn't sing. They came in silence. A terrifying, heavy silence. The Lakota had returned, but this time it was not just a tired group. This was a war party, 500 strong. People in town panicked. Doors slammed. Mothers pulled children from the streets. Men grabbed old rifles and rusty pistols. The church bell rang wild, not for prayer but for warning. It screamed the same message over and over. They're coming. They're coming. Inside the parsonage, Reverend Hale stood frozen. His face, normally red with pride, turned pale. Martha dropped a dish and didn't even flinch as it shattered. Then someone shouted in the street, "It's the orphan girl. They want her." All eyes turned to the attic window. Clara felt her body go cold. The same people who ignored her, who never said her name, were now blaming her. She backed away from the window and crawled into the corner of the attic. Her fingers clutched at her apron, but there was no doll there now, only an empty pocket. Outside, the crowd grew. "She brought them down on us," yelled a man. "I saw her give that savage girl something." "She's a witch," a woman cried. "She gave them magic." Reverend Hale raised his hands, his voice booming. "She acted against the Lord. She gave comfort to heathens, and now they return. With demons." Clara shut her eyes tight. Her chest ached. Her breath came fast. All she had done was share something precious. She had tried to give kindness. Was that wrong? Suddenly, boots thundered up the stairs. Sheriff Callahan burst into the attic. He looked tired, frightened, but not cruel. "Come on, girl," he said. "They're asking for you." Clara shook her head. "Please, I didn't mean to." "I believe you," the sheriff said softly. "But they're not asking. They want the girl who gave the doll." She stood up on shaky legs. The crowd outside parted like water as the sheriff led Clara through. They didn't cheer. They didn't cry. They stared. Faces filled with fear, but also relief. They were ready to hand her over to save themselves. Across the field, the line of warriors stopped just beyond the creek. It looked like a wall of silence and fire. Then one rider broke off and slowly approached. He was tall, proud, with black hair tied back. Chaiton. He dismounted and stood in front of the sheriff and Clara. No weapons, no war cries, just calm power. A second man stepped forward and spoke in English. "We are here for the girl who gave the gift." The sheriff gave a small nod and gently pushed Clara forward. She felt as if her legs didn't belong to her. She stood small and shaking in front of Chaiton, the doll giver, and now the center of everything. Chaiton looked at her, then spoke in his own language. The translator listened, then turned to the crowd. His daughter, Zitkala, lost her mother to sickness 3 weeks ago. The doll was all she had left of her. It was swept away in a river. Since then, she cried every day. She would not eat, she would not smile. He paused. The crowd stood frozen. But yesterday, a stranger girl gave her own doll. A doll stitched with love. The little one smiled again. She ate. She slept. Her grief broke. The girl healed her. Gasps filled the air. Clara stared at the ground, her face pale. Chaitin stepped closer, then bowed his head slightly. She gave what she could not afford to give. The translator said, "So we come not with war, but with honor." Clara Ara looked up. Chaitin's daughter, Zitkala, rode forward with the doll in her arms. She smiled. The sheriff whispered, "They didn't come to take you." Tears filled Clara Ara's eyes. They had come to thank her. The wind in Redemption Bluff had never felt heavier. The people stood frozen. The tension was thick, so thick it felt like breathing through cloth. All eyes were on Clara Ara, the orphan girl in the faded dress, standing before a warrior chief, with hundreds of fighters at his back. But instead of violence, something unexpected happened. Chaitin, the tall Lakota leader, knelt slowly in front of Clara Ara. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A warrior, a chief, bowing before a child. It was something none of them had ever seen or imagined. Clara Ara's knees shook. Her hands trembled by her sides. The translator spoke again, his voice calm but firm. He bows to the one who showed his daughter the gift of a mother's spirit. In our people, this act is not small. It is sacred. Clara Ara couldn't speak. Her eyes filled with tears she didn't understand. Chaitin rose and stepped aside. Zitkala, his little girl, rode forward on a pony, still clutching the calico doll. She looked at Clara Ara shyly. Then in slow, careful steps, she slid off her pony and walked over to Clara Ara. The doll was pressed tight to her chest. But Zitkala extended her other hand and reached out. Clara Ara took it. Two small girls. One pale and trembling. One dark-eyed and quiet. They stood hand in hand in the middle of a town that had only known fear and silence. Suddenly a woman screamed from the edge of the crowd. "Witch! That doll was cursed. Now she's turned them against us." Reverend Hale's voice rose like fire. "It's blasphemy. It's manipulation. She's tricked them. It's the devil's work." Sheriff Callahan stepped forward fast. "That's enough." But the Reverend wasn't done. He pointed straight at Clara Ara, his eyes wild. "She should be punished for bringing pagans into our Christian home, for daring to act above her place." Chaitin turned his gaze sharply to the preacher. He understood the tone, if not the words. His eyes were like blades. The translator said something quickly in Lakota. Chaitin responded in a single cold phrase. Then the translator looked straight at Reverend Hale and said clearly, "He says you talk loudly for a man who hides behind books and children." Reverend Hale turned red, but no one laughed. Because what happened next was more shocking than anything yet. Zitkala, still holding Clara Ara's hand, walked slowly across the open space and stood right in front of the preacher. She reached into her own beaded pouch and pulled out a single smooth feather. It was long, white, and tipped with red. She held it out to the Reverend. Chaitin's voice came again, translated at once. She gives him this. It is a peace feather. In our ways it means, I give you, no fight, only heart. The Reverend looked confused, angry, but also embarrassed. Martha Hale stepped forward suddenly, her eyes full of something hard to read. She whispered sharply to her husband, "You will make a fool of us all. Let it be." The crowd, so hungry for a fight just minutes ago, was now watching something they didn't understand. A kind of peace that came not from power, but from one small act of kindness. Suddenly, an older Lakota woman dismounted from the line of riders and approached Clara Ara. Her braids were silver and her face held deep lines of age and wisdom. She placed something around Clara Ara's neck. It was a small necklace, simple beads and a tiny carved bear. The translator spoke again. She gives this to you, from the Bear Clan. It means protector of spirit. You gave your spirit to a child who had lost hers. Now they call you one of them. Clara Ara looked down at the necklace. Her fingers closed around it. In the parsonage, she had been invisible. In the town, she had been unwanted. But here now, in front of warriors, she was something else. She was seen. She was honored. The townspeople didn't cheer. They didn't clap. But something in their eyes had changed. The fear was still there. But there was something else. A flicker. of shame, and for some a flicker of respect. Chaitan nodded once more. Then he turned to the sheriff. "We will leave now," said the translator. "But if harm comes to her, we will return, and not with feathers." That message was clear. No one dared answer. Clara Ara stood still, overwhelmed, as the Lakota warriors turned their horses and began to ride away. But before leaving, Zitkala ran back. She touched Clara Ara's cheek and smiled. Then she was gone, and Redemption Bluff was silent again, but everything had changed. People of Redemption Bluff talked about the day the Lakota warriors came. Some remembered the sound of hooves like thunder. Others remembered the silence, the way 500 warriors stood like statues on the plains. But no one forgot the girl. Freud. Town had changed, but it didn't happen all at once. It began that same evening. Clara sat alone on the back steps of the parsonage. Her hands trembled. Her mind was full. She had just been honored by a chief. She had been protected by warriors. But here in the quiet she still felt small, forgotten, like a ghost again. Martha Hale opened the door and tossed a piece of bread at her feet. "Eat it," she said sharply. "And don't think for a moment that your stunt makes you special. You'll scrub the floors twice tomorrow." Clara nodded and picked up the bread. She was too tired to cry. In the attic that night, she sat holding the beaded bear necklace. She rubbed her thumb over it again and again as if trying to remind herself it was real. But the room was still cold. The air was still thin. She still missed the doll. The next morning, something strange happened. A package was left on the doorstep. No name. No note. Inside was a small handmade blanket stitched with great care. Tucked inside it was a smooth stone painted with a bear and a feather. Clara knew it was from them. She held the blanket close. Warm tears rolled down her cheeks. Someone somewhere far on the plains had thought of her, and not just thought of her, they had taken the time to give back. Later that week, more odd things happened. The townspeople who once looked through her now stared at her. Some whispered. Some moved aside when she passed. A few even nodded. One day at the market, old Mrs. Greaves handed her an apple. She didn't smile, but she said softly, "For the brave." Clara didn't know what to say. No one had ever given her anything before, not like this. Reverend Hale was furious. He told the townspeople to stop treating that girl like a queen. But fewer people listened to him now. Even Sheriff Callahan began stopping by the parsonage. Once he brought her a small tin of wild honey. "From the hills," he said, "thought you might like it." But the real shock came one Sunday morning. The church was full. As the Reverend spoke of sin and punishment, the door creaked open. Everyone turned. A Lakota elder stood there. Not a warrior. Not armed. Just a calm, wise woman with long braids and quiet eyes. She walked slowly down the aisle. Every footstep was heavy with meaning. She said nothing. She carried nothing, except the doll. Clara stood from her seat in the back, frozen. The elder walked straight to her and held out the calico doll. It had been cleaned. Its dress was patched with fine fabric. The black thread face had been gently restitched. She placed it in Clara's hands. Then she leaned down and whispered something only Clara could hear. "Even gifts that go away can find their way home." Clara's heart broke open again, but this time, not from sadness, from something new, something like joy, something like love. The elder left as quietly as she came. No one stopped her, not even the Reverend. Clara clutched the doll to her chest. She didn't even realize she was smiling. From that day on, her life was never the same. She wasn't just the orphan anymore. She was the girl who stopped a war with kindness, the one who gave away her treasure and received something greater in return, the one who had family beyond blood, out on the plains where warriors remembered her name. Years later, people still told the story. Some added extra things, like magic or visions. But the truth stayed the same. A girl gave all she had to a crying child, and that one choice changed everything. even the town itself. Because once Redemption Bluff had been full of fear, but for one moment, because of one girl, it became a place of peace. And that kind of story never really ends.